RRebel asks, do you have any study tips? Well, guess what? I have two fantastic study tips that are ideal almost in any scenario, but it goes beyond any topic, right? Specifically, software engineering is what I'm talking about in this case. There, like you mentioned here, Rebel, there are so much info. It's difficult for me to remember it all and jot it down in the notes, right? It's hard to jot down notes, and guess what? Often it's really easy to forget. You forget the notes. The notes, yeah, of course, if you write, you're good a little bit. The best two tips that I have that work for me, one is better than the other. The first one is by far the best. What works for me is writing the algorithms as code by hand, in person, on a computer, and then running that code and seeing the output. That alone, that one thing, allows me to remember it forever. I don't know why it works, though just the action of doing it myself, seeing it firsthand, getting the feedback, emits this sort of emotional response. Is it going to work? The fear that it doesn't work? That kind of emotional response is something that human brains tend to remember. And then when you see it work, you're so, happiness comes. You're so happy. And then you see it working, and then that gets stuck in your memory as well. Of course, then frustration, which happens a lot if you're, say, studying a new language from scratch, or like the programming language like Rust, for example, is very difficult to get it right. Often you get it wrong, and so that is also an emotional response of frustration. And so that will stay in your memory too. It's all about remembering that emotional response. It's really that's so important. That's mandatory. That's how human brains work. They remember emotional responses. They don't remember basically anything else. So if you're just sort of copying stuff down on paper, there's not a whole lot of emotion, right? It's kind of just, just chill, which is nice. I like that. However, emotional responses, the best way I invoke that is by writing the code firsthand. For study tips, I was just mentioning my number one, by far best study tip in just the previous segment there. There is a second option that also works. It's not as good as the first one, but the second option is, I would say, probably the second best. And that's kind of what I'm doing right now. In order to study or learn something new, you have to run it to input and output on your person. Now, of course, you can do this by writing down notes, though that is not, I would say, as good as explaining it. So something I'm doing right now is I'm reading, I'm getting input, but then I'm also describing to you in this video format. Hey, guess what? I've learned this thing, and here's how I've understood it, and here's how it works. So it's essentially by teaching others is the idea. You can learn something or try to learn something and then explain it to someone else, actually talking to someone else about it. What this does is it also emits emotional responses in your brain. A little bit. It releases other kinds of, chemicals that solidify those neurons in your brain. It's the second best approach that I have found to remembering basically anything. As long as you sort of take a chance to learn it a little bit and then describe it to someone else, you are going to be able to remember that a lot more easily. Now, between those two tips, you will have the best possible recall compared to any other strategies. Flashcards, those are games. They're nice. They do emit some short-term emotional responses, but they don't have that full impact.